home, and he said, she is the kindest person to everybody that works in this courthouse. And you know, I couldn't believe it. And that was the one and only time, 21 years, that I ever got a call from a custodian, a janitor. So that means a lot to me. And that's what you are. If you can relate to the people in the court and be polite and recognize them, that's important. Okay, now we talked about substance abuse. It's there and it's involved in so many criminal cases. So what remediation opportunities would you, as a trouble defendants, and helping them find solutions to their problems, therapy, recovery, what kind of things could you do?
Well, I think part of the answer to that question depends on the charge, the nature of the charge, the nature of the facts that are behind that charge. I mean, one set of facts of something simple yet criminal is driving with car insurance. Let's just say something like that. But what if there are underlying problems that, do we just treat it as a simple motor vehicle offense and then move on because that may not be the only thing that's been considered? But I think it's important to know the facts of the case. So for me to give that answer, it's a blanket answer to your question. But I would want to look at as many factors as are behind the charge that they're facing. And to give people that road or path, give them the keys. And sometimes they don't know how to drive. And sometimes they don't have anybody in their life that has ever taught them right from wrong.
Right.
And they, to see someone come into a courthouse with maybe their clothes aren't perfect, maybe their clothes are disheveled, or maybe they haven't shaven, that may be the best that they have. And when we talk to people, when we see them face to face, there's a lot about speaking to someone and understanding things just by reading them, just by interacting with them. So I would ask myself, my future self, hopefully, to consider everything that I just said when making an attempt to help people to succeed.
So I think I know you well enough by speaking with you and seeing your resume. What's your opinion on maximum minimum sentencing?
I've never liked it. When I was in law school and we were studying, and it was a class that was given by, it was called trial advocacy. And it was, I don't know if you probably know the name Greta Van Susteren. She does a show and she's been interactive. She taught us a class on how to try cases. And at the time she was handling some very large federal criminal offenses. And that's at the time when mandatory sentencing was just coming of its own in the federal court system. And it was a new thing to me to wrap my head around, like, well, there are exceptions. And I don't necessarily think that the hands of a judge, particularly in the district court, they should be tied with something that's automatic, because it's not the same set of facts. It's not the same person. There are so many factors that go into the offense that they committed and maybe into their life before that offense occurred, that there's an opportunity to step in. So
absolutely, I agree with you. I believe the judge should have discretion, and we don't have pardons here. I can't do it. That's what people don't know, that I don't have that authority. If I did, we have drawers full of people in our office, people who have done some misdemeanor that really should be pardoned, but we don't. I asked them. That's why I'm last, but myself. Anyway, I'll tell you an example. We had, now this probably, you talk about that law 40 years ago. And this was probably, I don't know, 10 years ago. We did have someone coming for a pardon. And I think of him so often. and he was about 58 years old. And when he was 17 years old, he was on his way to school. And a 21-year-old friend and said, would you do me a favor and sell these bags of marijuana, $25 each, and he gave him 6 bags. Innocent, gullible, made the most foolish decision in his life, and he said, okay. Good kid, never had a problem in his life. He was doing well in school, he was a good son, brother, whatever. And so he sold 1 bag, he tried to sell another one, and that student reported him, and they found the other bags in his locker. So he went to prison. And I think, and I have to think, if it was a judge like you're going to be, to use your discretion, maybe you could give him service, not send him away. He didn't deserve that. He made a mistake. So now after he missed his youth, the prom, the dances, sports, maybe he could have got a scholarship to go to college, no college. And when he came out, he got a job in a private school as a custodian. Guess what? When he came before us, that school closed. So yeah, he got a pardon, but where'd he go at 58 years old without that burden, you know? So, and he had health problems, he had cancer, he lost a leg, and he went on with his life, he married, had children, very involved in his community. He was a coach, very involved in his church. And I think, what an injustice for this man that the judge couldn't use discretion and give him something different than putting him in prison, you know? So I agree with you on that. Now, I'd like to talk about a couple of cases that made an impression on me. Talk about that 19-year-old drunk driving and his friend killed.
I wrote about it in my application as one of the 5 cases that meant a lot to me in my career. And it was an OUI homicide, and it was a situation where he was driving, his best friend was his passenger.
I wish the council were here to hear this story, I really do.
And the car flipped over and his best friend and passenger died instantly. And I mention that not because of the way that the case was handled. There were some delicate pieces to it, to putting together a plan that would work with consideration of the victim, consideration of the family, consideration of the defendant. That having been said, I mean, there were other cases like that of such importance, but when he was done with his probation, he showed up at my office one day. And I looked at him, and the first thought was, something happened. Did he violate probation? And I said, is everything okay? He said, yes. I said, I just wanted to say that I just finished probation. I wanted to thank you for everything. The story gets a little bit more ironic, because when I was on my way to meet you last week, I received a call from his wife looking for some information from that file. And of course, this is over 20 years, maybe 25 years ago. And the irony of it was that he called me on the day that I was meeting with you to discuss things about today. And I wrote back, and she ended up sending me an email about what she was looking for. And I responded and I said, well, you know, it was ironic that you happened to call me today. And then he, the defendant, the client, sent me back a message. And he and his wife together said that was a moment his life could have gone one of 2 ways. He was 19 years old. He was graduating from high school. He was on his way to college. And that the way that everyone treated him that day in that environment from me to the courthouse, to the staff at the courthouse, that it paved the way for him to go on with his life despite what he had done. And that's why it meant a lot to me.
Significant. The other one that I thought was telling was the 17-year-old. She's a valedictorian of her class, and she brought that up in her speech to the parents, to her students, to the faculty. So tell us that story.
So when I meet with people, often for the first time, to talk about their cases, I often use a phrase, hey, this can happen to you. And now I have a real life version of it did happen to someone like you. She was a senior and she wasn't from the area. She was a valedictorian of her class, and she was trying to navigate her way home through GPS, and it took her through some back roads, and ultimately she was pulled over and arrested. There was no reason to ever think that this young woman would be in front of a courthouse, in a courtroom, in front of a judge, facing a charge like this. Nothing I've ever done in her life had led anyone to think that would happen to her. So the case took a few months to resolve, and by the time it was over, she was getting ready to deliver her speech at graduation, and she communicated with me later and indicated that it was part of her speech, the it can happen to you kind of thing. And so it was a warning that people out there, sometimes good people do make bad decisions.
And she certainly made an impression on her students, to say that story. I do want to say, I don't know Milford, but I have to tell you, I was a friend of Maureen Flaherty. And God rest her soul. And she was the hardest working state representative here. She was not in my district, but I followed her. She didn't grow up like us in a family. She lived in foster homes all her life. And she dedicated herself to legislation for child abuse, anything to do with children. So, you know, I think of her, and, you know, with the Times, she was voted out by a 24-year-old. So, you know, very sad. I felt bad for her. But what she has done, the legislation that she put through, is remarkable. And I was just so thrilled that I had the chance when I got here to meet with her, to admire her. Now you have someone else in mind you. I think he's the chair of your select board. Oh my God. He was on the phone, probably 20 minutes, and he couldn't say enough about you. What a good person you were, that you'd be a wonderful judge. I'm just sorry he's here, because it was a beautiful conversation that we had. So anyway, but the other thing is, I do want to say, well, he's not here, I wanted to say that I agree with Councilor Iannella, and I love private practitioners, solo practice, 31 years. And my philosophy is you choose who you're going to represent. You're not in an office where they say, okay, here it is, and then you got the police report and you're halfway there. And in being a solo practitioner, you have reached out to people who don't have the money, who can't get a lawyer, and you've helped them. And you couldn't even give a number in your J&C questionnaire of how many pro bono cases you've had. That's quite a tribute. And so you've helped a lot of people out there. And I'm sure maybe you don't hear from all of them, but they're grateful. And, you know, and you've been involved in, you don't hear about this binding arbitration. cases. So tell us about how that's different.
Well, I would always compare binding arbitration to a mini trial. Without the formality of being in a courtroom, the function's very much the same. An arbitrator plays the role of a decision maker, much like a judge. The parties present their case, there's testimony often, cross-examination often, and it can be resolved in a less formal venue and certainly more quickly than the district court has the time to hear. So it's an option to resolve cases differently.
So, you have really been someone in private practice that you really have represented the people in that area, really a close-knit, section. So how do you feel that that's very important to be able to be in a courthouse where you're familiar with that area? How does that weigh in?
I don't think it's much of a factor. I think we represent people that are within our community, and I know Attorney Murray would feel the same way, people that we often know from some other part of our life. They may be friends of friends or friends of family, or they may be referrals from other people. They may be return clients. I think that's a tribute when they come to us without us putting this big advertisement on a billboard, which we don't do. Being in a courthouse where those people come, I don't think makes it any different than being in a courthouse where you don't know one. You're still administering justice the same way. You
Yes,
treat people the same, and I think if people don't know you, it might take a little bit of time to get to know you, and I think that's an opportunity to just expand and help people understand who you are.
Well, and I've been here long enough and I've heard it so often from Judge Pomeroy to so many people, district court is the people's court. Everyone says that. You couldn't get, I shouldn't say it publicly, but you couldn't get Judge Pomeroy out of the district court. Those are the people that serve in the district court that love it. They love the interaction with the people that come into the court, the people they work with. Do you see that in the same definition as a people's court?
Yes, but before I say that, when you mention Judge Pomeroy, it's important to explain that the young man sitting behind you was his summer intern a couple of summers ago.
Oh, no.
And I heard about Judge Pomeroy every evening,
How's his name?
every evening.
Oh.
And I don't know him. I don't practice out in Dedham, and I.
Now that you're here, and he may not know this, 21 years. He's the only one that ever came before me who got an award from the animal, what is it? The animal, oh my God, I can't even think of it. Animal control, what is it?
MSPCA or.
It's it's Animal Rescue League.
Oh.
Animal Rescue League. And when he was an attorney, he had a lot of cases representing animals that were abused, that were killed, whatever. And so I just tell you this story. He was out with the other attorneys this night, and they said, "Oh, we got to stop here." And he stopped in this building, and they went in. It was filled with people from the Animal Rescue League giving him this testimony.
Isn't that nice?
I've never seen that before, and, I think, and loving animals, as everybody in this room does, I think there should be more heavier sentencing with people who torture and kill animals, their dogs and cats and everything, but they don't seem to get that sentencing, and it's a life. But anyway, I'll get off my soapbox on that. But isn't that funny, Judge Pomeroy? But that is amazing. So, the thing is that I love your, the town meeting, all of these things, school committee, and volunteering for all of these other boards besides that, And so I think what do you think you learned from all of those your volunteering experiences and even as being a coach, how do you think that makes you even a better judge?
I think that there is zero connection between doing those things and being a judge. But what you do is it defines the person you are to become a judge. So if you serve your community, if you serve the youth, if you're doing those things, and I think you're establishing and playing a role in someone's development in their youth, you know, civic and charitable organizations like the Lions Club, it's defining who you are. Because if I had not done those things, I would not be sitting here today because it wouldn't have defined who I am and all that I have done. So what you see on paper and what you get, I think it's important to know the story behind the story. And again, that's just who I am.
And that's just one of the associations with the Lions, and you were a Lion of the Year. But they do a lot of wonderful things. So, I mean, all of that. And when I talk with your selectmen, talking about your church and everything, so you've been there in church community. So, you know, it's your compassion that I really saw when we met. And I'm just so happy, number one, that you applied and that the governor appointed you. Because I'm going to tell you, there's people out there that I see, and they've applied 2-3 times, and they're not going to get the position. And unfortunately, political people jump the line, 40-year-olds, whatever, you know? And look, I don't want to stereotype. That is absolute. There are 40-year-olds that are qualified, that have had experience and qualifications and all of that. But let's see, I mean, I'm going to the Superior Court with 6 cases in 20 years. So that's, you know, so I'm very opinionated, as you know, and, but I want change. I want to see more people like you. I wish we could clone you because we really need people with your honesty. And that's primarily the thing, honesty. And I'm just so proud, and I don't have a poker face, and I'm just going to be very pleased to poker you next week. And I'm sorry that I'm alone here. I wish they could hear, you know, some of those cases you've had, and the compassion you especially showed to that 17-year-old, 19-year-old. There are other cases I could have brought up, but those really, that you made such an impression on that 17-year-old girl about it could happen to anyone. That was the theme of her speech at her graduation. That's something you should be proud of. Well, look at, you know, now I'm going to take them out again now. So I'm done. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Counselor. First thing I want to do is to, again, acknowledge and thank your witnesses for coming today. And I neglected to mention earlier, but I know that attorney and former rep Fernandez is unable to be here today, but also spoke with many of the counselors in support of your nomination. The benefit of going last, I suppose, is a lot of the questions and topics have been covered. One thing I hear over and over in your responses is humility. I heard it in your opening statement, thanking the governor's Office of Legal Counsel staff, talking about the clients you've served. That's so important to me in addition to what we've talked about. So I just want to ask, kind of frame the context of some of the issues that have come up and put it before you of how you formulate all this. So we've heard today, and first of all, I want to say, I couldn't be prouder to live in the Commonwealth. Our justice system is fantastic, but we have room for improvement, like everything, right? So we heard today about the system that swirls around the courts and how they all interact. Obviously, we want public safety to be our top priority, but we heard about how we have a probation system that right now, from Councilor Kennedy's anecdote, in some ways criminalizes alcoholism or addiction. We've heard from Councilor Jubenville that in some ways the system is criminalizing poverty when fees are applied that we can't expect an individual to afford. And we heard a little bit from Councilor Duff about our parole system, which is, Councilor Duff and I share a perspective that it's woefully broken and backlogged and really perpetuates injustice that that exists in our system. And then finally, with Councilor Jumeville, we heard about the racial disparities that we know exist. I always say, because it's surprising for folks to hear, we have the highest Latino incarceration rate in the country. We have the 14th highest Black incarceration rate in the country. The sentencing disparities are there and documented. And we also have mental health issues that you and I had occasion to talk about before the hearing. We have the Trump Department of Justice says that our Department of Corrections is violating our incarcerated population's civil rights around access to mental health care. We have the 4th highest suicide rate in the country among our incarcerated population. And I've heard from you that you are someone who takes the full picture into account. So all those things I listed, there's no judge who could solve those problems, right? And in fact, it's not even on the courts necessarily alone, right? It's this whole system. So I wonder if you could put a point on how all these things that are out of your control, how your vision of what's going to come down the road when you're making a decision, how all that context impacts you.
I think step one is just recognizing that it exists. I think that there was a time and there was an era we all ignored these things. Even the signs and the indications pointed them, and we said that can't be. And it might be because someone didn't think or feel that way about these inequities, but it didn't mean that they didn't exist. So I think step one is recognizing that they exist, acknowledging that there is a problem, asking to become part of the solution, and volunteering that piece of your job, whether as attorneys or member of the bar, members of the judiciary, members of the legislature, to try to fix it. Do we have a solution? Do we have an answer to fix everything? No. And I'm not going to sit here and tell you that I do either. But I would look forward to an opportunity to become part of that solution, to play a role and help convey to others the importance of fixing the things that not necessarily broken, but just need to be buffed a little bit.
Would it be fair to say that, would it be fair to interpret some of the responses I've heard today to say that you're interested in impartial justice, of course, but also in pragmatic justice? So as you said, we don't want recidivism, right? We don't want folks to become incarcerated, not get the treatment they need, come out, and then they're incarcerated again, right? Over and over and over. And I appreciate that pragmatism. So the last question I want to ask is, regarding what we have going on at Mass and Cass right now. It's another situation where there's no easy answers. And I applaud anyone who's willing to step up and try to present a solution, right? But I have heard stories and I have heard from attorneys, and it's not the preponderance of what's happening, but instances where a defendant is presenting with substance abuse disorder, is presenting in a state of detox, essentially, and both the defense attorney and the prosecutor asking to put this individual into treatment and not incarcerate them, and them being incarcerated. Now, again, I don't know the full context of every time that's happened, but I know one or two that I find a little disturbing. I'm wondering, when you're faced with that situation, when you're faced with a defense attorney and a prosecutor who are both advocating for treatment options, how would you respond?
I know that there's a perspective out there that people say, judges say, they'll get cleaned up in jail. And it's logically it's true, but it's just not a solution.
It's a short term. At best, it's short term, right? At best.
We don't ignore that there are things that happen while in custody that may not necessarily be what we think happen. But I think, and it's been a repeated occurrence of my theme today, that supporting people and getting them the support that they need, even though if we don't know what they need, help them to identify what the need is. I would certainly want to help someone before putting them in a situation that's not going to help them.
And I believe your sincerity behind that. And, the last comment I'll make is the anecdote that Councilor Devaney had you bring up regarding, both really, where you were supporting those individuals, those young people. And we know that young people are not necessarily adept at making the best decisions or having impulse control. And we know that that can extend beyond the age of 18, which is the arbitrary age of majority that we have in our legal system. And so I would hope and I trust that every young person who comes before you is given the same level of support, because as I'm sure you know, and I've worked with so many children who their experience and interaction with the court system is negative from an early age, right? Whether it's because they're involved in family court with domestic issues with their parents, or whether it's they end up in juvenile court for any number of reasons. And then they get and then a 19-year-old young man or young woman gets into district court and they haven't had support, they have defenses up. I've certainly had child clients who aren't willing to share with me what's going on, right? It makes it very difficult to act in their best interest when there's not trust between client and attorney. So I trust and I hope that you'll ensure that every defendant who comes before you will have, that you'll endeavor to make sure that they're having that level of support to make decisions that'll keep them out of district court in the future.
I enjoyed our conversation about that. And it's almost like you're supposed to flip a switch when they become an adult, and in district court, they're supposed to be treated. I mean, in many ways, they're still very, very young and haven't fully matured. It's important that they get treated knowing their situation and that they may not have made the right decision. And that it may not have been their fault that they didn't make the right decision.
In education, we talk about trauma-informed care, that when a student is manifesting negative behavior, there's almost certainly a cause behind it, right? And if the cause isn't addressed, then no amount of discipline or tough love is going to fix it. So I appreciate your perspective on that. Milford's a great community, and someone from a family of immigrants, I know Milford is a community that continues to welcome immigrants, right? And so Milford continues to diversify. And I also appreciate that you'll have that perspective as first and second generation folks are embedding themselves in the community and potentially appearing before you. Councilor Devaney, you have a comment?
I just wanted to make one last comment, because I didn't get into parole board because it really doesn't relate to you that much. But you will be working with probation officers, and you have noted how important that is to work with them. So having said that, someone who goes to parole board meetings, I in the back, they don't know. But I just wanted to make a note so that you know, we have voted for 2 wonderful people on the parole board. There's still some good ones up there. Anyway, not all. Lee Gartenberg is the most noted specialist in parole in Massachusetts. And Lucy Soto Abbey, who also happens to be Puerto Rican and speaks Spanish with such a value on the parole board, were removed. And, when I first got elected, it was I concentrated on getting the parole board changed because they were all prosecutors. And these are not prosecutors, and Lucy was appointed by 2 governors. And Lee was used 4 months and he was removed. So I just want to say that, governors' councils don't have a lot of ability to control. We have someone here to vote on, we vote yes or no. And these 2 people should never have been removed and replaced by prosecutors. And one of those prosecutors, after a year, last year, decided, I don't want to go before the governor's council every 5 years. And now she is an assistant court magistrate. So this is how the system works. But we're losing good people. And I just want the public to know, we don't have a lot of ability. We don't have all these names and say, yeah, this one. We don't know. I don't know how many are interviewed or whatever. I only know the people who are doing your job here, because I've been here 21 years, and justice is not served. So thank you for allowing me to say that, because I didn't, yeah, thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you.
No comment. You can't sneak into a parole board meeting. You have to be signed in. So anyway, that's all.
It's not a debate, thank you.
Attorney DeCapua, congratulations on your nomination. I look forward to putting forward your name and your nomination at our subsequent Governor's Council Assembly. And with that, this meeting or hearing is adjourned.